to Cosmic Connections. I'm Starling Brighter, and I'm here with Christopher, and we have a guest, Michael, on with us today. We're going to be talking to Michael about what he does in VA. He's right now studying Vibrational Astrology. So before we jump into that, I just want to say hi. How are you guys doing today?
Hello.
Doing good?
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here, guys.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on too. We thought it would be interesting to have you because you're in a different space with astrology and you do different things that are interesting. I think our audience will like to know about you. So, tell us about yourself, Michael.
So the astrology bug bit me many years ago. I had a reading one time in 1994 that was actually gifted to me. It was between my undergraduate and graduate degree. I was kind of working someplace and wasn't sure what was going to be next, having a bunch of angst. Someone at work said, I'm going to send you to my astrologer. And I said, okay. I didn't know anything about astrology other than my sun sign, which is a Capricorn. And I said, well, all right. Now, I felt ambivalent. I was grateful for the gifting of the reading, but I was raised in a faith-based tradition that didn't look too kindly on astrology. And I had this pulling back and forth. Should I do it? Should I not? Well, lo and behold, I had the consultation done, and that lit a very small spark at that point that tended to smolder and then I guess rage into a burning fire. So that's kind of what got me started into it. And then by the time I got to graduate school, of course, they beat anything out of you that isn't part of the dogma. So I had to kind of put that on ice and keep my astrological studies to myself. And back then, we didn't have the internet or YouTube. It was all books. So you start buying books and you read this. And I thought I knew what was going on. And then I get confused. And it's like, yeah, I'll put that on the shelf and come back to it later. And then get another book, which is explaining something in a totally different way. And then my head started to just kind of swell with all this stuff. I said, there's something here, but I'm not quite sure what it is. Because my background, my professional training prior to astrology is I've got a master's in clinical psych. I was trained to be a therapist and did some of that work for a while. But where I spent the better part of the last 25 years is doing pre-employment assessments for companies when they are looking to hire someone to make sure they match the right person to the right job. So now you can probably already begin to see how these two worlds of astrology and assessment, while very different, they have a lot of similar underpinnings. And that's the real interesting part to me about the astrological world. And that is when we look at psychological and psychometric assessments, I don't care what anybody says, every single one of those assessments that are used today have their roots in astrology, because that was the primary system to classify human behavior and explain it and break it down into ways that make sense. It started with astrology. Then it fell in favor, then it fell out of favor, then it fell in favor again. So anyways, I digress. But anyways, so the corporate world is where I've spent a good amount of my time. But over the past, I'd say 10-ish or so years, been dived into astrology feet first. And obviously everyone on this call is a VA astrologer. And when I ran into vibrational astrology, that's when the floodgates were unleashed. Because to me, coming out of a psychological background where you have to have data and you've got to have validation studies and you got to have all these things to make sure that these assessments do what they claim to do, that was the one part that was missing in astrology. I knew that there was something there, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And when I ran into VA initially, my head was like blown off my torso, because it was like, whoa, there's so much here. I didn't know what was what. And it was a lot of moving parts. But then the more I got into it, it's like, they're using the same type of validation techniques that are used with assessments. So I probably need to look at this a lot more. Fast forward, here we are today. So hopefully I didn't ramble too much, because, I can end up in a rabbit hole, believe that or not.
No, that was really great. Thank you for sharing all that. Sure. And by the way, your website is blueridgeastrology.com, right?
Correct. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, so I figured it only appropriate to incorporate that into the name. And that's a lot easier to remember and spell than Spremulli, because, let's face it.
Using your name, yeah.
So yes, BlueRidgeAstrology.com, and that's the same moniker on all the socials as well for anyone who may want to check that out.
Awesome. I'll definitely put links to everything
sure.
in the description too, so everybody can check that out very easily. So that's great. So you are right now attending classes in VA, correct?
I am. I'm in the second year of the intensive with David Cochran, and learning lots. You got to unlearn a lot of stuff when you get into VA, or I don't want to say unlearn, but kind of open your mind to just put some things on the shelf.
Yes.
Because one of the things that would just frustrate me to no end about astrology, and I always, if I have an opportunity to go see an astrologer and pay my money and just sit there as a client in a different town or city, I do that. I don't tell them I'm an astrologer, and it's not like I'm looking to jam anybody up, but I want to see how people operate, and I want to see how they operate in the natural world and what goes on. And one of the things that would just make me nuts about some astrologers is what I like to call crowbar astrology. There's probably a more eloquent term, but they would say something about, well, you've got Gemini, a moon, and therefore, you've got this duality. Okay, that's kind of fine, but what about this? Well, then we need to go look at the ruling planet for that the planetary ruler for that particular sign. Or we look there, that doesn't quite map out. Well, maybe we need to go look at the final dispositor. It's like, all right, give me a break. It's all this hunting around, looking around. And when there was nothing there, a lot of times I would have astrologers try to make something fit. And that was the one thing that is like, nah, that doesn't work for me. Just based with my education and background and training, it just, and listen, I always tell people, you do you. There are many different systems of astrology out there. There's like 80 of them, I think, at last count. And some more popular than others. But when I ran into VA, I discovered that we have rules, Christopher. And I know you're fond about rules. You have to follow a process to interpret this stuff. You can't just throw things against the wall without any type of foundation. That was the big connection for me. And that's where, again, you kind of have to put some of the other experiences about astrology just on the shelf for a moment to adapt it through the lens of VA, because we do have very strict criteria on when you interpret something, what it means, the intensity. And that was speaking my language coming from the data science background.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was somewhat similar. When I began to look for a teacher, because you get to a point where there's just too much here, and you're right, it's very confusing to read a lot of books because they say different things, even though once you sort of get to a certain level you can make sense of it, but if you're not at that level, you cannot make sense of it. So
yes,
very confusing. And with my background more from a religious education, and we had something called hermeneutics, which was what I was used to, because you can cherry pick any book, and religious books are the same way. You can cherry pick them and you can make them say whatever you want to say, whatever you want, But if you really use the rules of hermeneutics, this is how you're supposed to properly interpret. So that was always in my mind. And that is something that I saw within VA was proper hermeneutics. You're trying to look at it in the context of something. It's not just cherry picked out, or it's not dictating. Oh, this is saying this is what has to happen. And wait a minute, are you telling me this is what I have to do? Or are you saying these are the options? Anything that tells me something I have to do, I'm already having a problem with it.
Exactly. So, it's like those posts on Facebook. I want to see who reads this all the way to the end. Put your finger here. It's like, bye. I'm gone. I'm out of here. Ain't gonna
you've lost me. Yeah. You're not telling me you're not manipulating me.
Exactly. It's like, I'll fix you. Scroll.
Yeah. So it's more of a discovery approach, where you're looking at what is, and we're trying to understand it, maybe from a slightly different point of view to give a broader sort of interpretation, a broader understanding. And does this help? Can we get through the blockage if we look at it from this way? That's, for me, what a lot of things are in life. It's, okay, there's blockage, and you've been looking at it like this the whole time, but now we're going to take a look at it over here, and I see the problem. Now I see what it is. That makes it easy. Yeah. So for me, that was a big thing. And then you want the integrity, you want the backing, you want to see that, okay, here we're going to run it through the experiments, we're going to run it through the research. Does it work? This is why we're saying what we're saying. I needed someone, for me, when I was looking and found David, I needed someone who had a spiritual bent, that there was a certain spiritual, there was an acknowledgement that there are things we don't know. When I talk about spirituality, I'm talking about the unknown. And then we have the known. We have the physical world that we can study and see. But I need both, where so much in the scientific world, I was seeing they were denying the unseen. And
strip it out. Yeah, if you can't see it, it doesn't exist. And like you and Starlene, I would imagine you as well. It's like, no, that's part of the magic. That's where the magic lies, in the unknown. Let's kind of see if we can piece it together. You can't just throw it out. Yeah.
That's for me where it was, I need the combination of the two. You know, you can have your head in the clouds as long as your feet are on the ground. But too many I would meet in the astrological world that both their head and their feet were in the clouds. And it's like, okay, you can make up anything you want then. You can just make this mean anything. And I do not like it when you can make it mean anything.
No, I'm with you. And I think that's what attracts people to VA who end up coming and staying and diving in deep. It's like, all of this can be here. We can have the science, you can have the data. You can also have the spiritual side, the metaphysical side, the unknown completely. Yeah. And it all kind of connects, because at the end of the day, if we're talking about vibrations and energy, it's all connected anyways.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I like your whole research was on human behavior and why people do what they do. And it's just not always so physically clear. Well, why did they do that? Like, good luck on that, man. There are reasons that we find that are much deeper than you can just physically assess, or in a material world assessment. Like,
absolutely,
it doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, it's it's really good. And yeah, I see that, the same things that you were going through, again, those are the things I was going through as well. So I definitely identify with your story.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
And it sounds like both of you guys, which I kind of went through the same thing too, were piecing pieces together here and there, but like the entirety of it was necessary. And that was where the education, the schooling, like Christopher and I undertook, and like you're undertaking, like, instead of piecing bits here and there, because I did the same thing. That's where that came in. And it was important, I think, in terms of like really understanding how to articulate things, and not just, the whatever comes to mind about whatever I'm talking about. It's more, centered around the research, the things that have actually really been understood, been used, been replicated, and things like that. So I think that's an important part to it. I'm grateful for that opportunity to be able to, to do that kind of work and understand things from that perspective, because, I think it puts a different spin on it. Definitely puts a different spin on it. And then obviously we're continuing doing the research and different things that we look at. So it's growing like any science-based type of thing would do. It would grow over time. But of course, that does take time too. So that's great.
Well,
is there anything?
I'm just going to say, it does. Yeah, you got two ADHDers here, maybe three. I don't know, Chris, if you're part of that club or not. We're going to be fighting for the microphone. Give it, I want a word in there. What I was going to say is the research is very exciting to me, because now, in the advent of, computer processing power that powered the space shuttle back in the 60s is on your desktop. We just now have access to stuff to be able to run studies quickly and massive data sets and see, does this check out or not? We might have an idea that sounds great, but then you run the metrics and it's like, no, not so much. And that was just unavailable, probably even as recent as the early 2000s. I mean,
This is all very new.
So I would envision, that astrology, as far as it becoming proper astrology, because, I put astrology in a couple of different camps. You've got consulting astrologers, which everyone on this call is, which, you meet with people to help them gain insight, answer questions or directions that they want to head in their life, serious stuff. And then you've got pop astrology, which is, these four water signs are going to experience tremendous abundance over the next. Please, now both have their place. My opinion, and my opinion only, is I liken horoscopes to that of the junk food of astrology. It's the junk food in the astrology world. And I produce daily horoscopes, so I'm putting myself into that category. But it gives you, just like junk food, it's fine to have a little bit every now and then, but you don't want to have a steady diet of pop astrology without proper grounding, because you're missing the meat. You're missing the real structure of what's actually going on there. And I've often said, when I was interviewed on a podcast, I said, anyone who listens to my daily horoscopes, or anyone else's for that matter, and makes major life decisions from that, you're an idiot. You shouldn't do that, because it's just a general snapshot, sliver in time, a theme of what may be going on. But to do the work, you got to have a system, and you got to have some structure as to what's going on there. And it's not just, well, all air signs are this, or all water signs. It's so much more complex than that. And I think that's what I found so alluring about VA, is that it gets into those complexities, because astrology is a beast of a subject. It's another universe. It really is. At least I found it to be. It took me years to get to the point where I would feel comfortable even telling people that because there's just so many things you got to learn, and you can't learn it overnight. It's a lifelong journey, at least from my perspective.
Yeah. Oh, same. I mean, yeah. I think that most astrologers would feel that way, because, they get older and they're still astrologers for the most part. It's like, that's just what happens, because you get engrossed in it and understanding the rhythms of what's going on, the vibrations of what's going on within the world, and then also within space. It's beautiful. I agree with you. I think that the pop astrologers have a place. They have something to share with people, but making any kind of major life decisions on any of that shouldn't be.
Not recommended. Because the only way to really know how current transits are affecting an individual is you got to look at them against their natal chart. But I look at it this way, and I've used this. This is from the original astrologer who I consulted with, and I love this analogy. And I think you mentioned this too. Astrology is nothing more than a cosmic weather report. That's it at the end of the day. Okay. Yeah. Just like the weather doesn't dictate our actions. You can go and sit out on the beach in a rainstorm if you so chose. Right. You could also decide to plant seeds in the winter, but they're not going to grow because the climate is not conducive to that. When I do anything from a horoscope, or I call them forecasts, because horoscopes are technically something different. So I'm splitting hairs, but the daily forecaster, here's the general theme for the day. What you do with it and how it impacts you is going to be totally dependent on where the planets are in your chart, and then whether you act on it or not. And it doesn't have a command over your life. It's not going to pin you down. It's a weather report. You can sit in the rain or come in where it's dry.
The reason I guess I feel like there's a place for those types of things, because when I was getting into astrology, just like everybody else here, there wasn't the internet like it is now. There just has never been. And I was reading newspapers in my late teens and reading up my I didn't even know my moon sign at the time. Just reading my horoscope, my sun sign, and that was it. And that led me to reading Linda Goodman books, which are very light pop astrology stuff from back in the 90s, but like they were like newer then. And it was just like, okay, that's interesting. But then it was like, keep going, and like you guys both talked about, it was like a little piece here and there. And then taking school and actually taking it seriously and thinking, well, learning the system, from nuts to bolts. I think that's how that saying goes. to get to a point where you end up feeling like you understand enough to be able to work with clients and things like that. So I think that evolution is important, and that, like you said, that doesn't happen overnight. It happens usually over time. And that's the only reason I say, like, pop kind of things are interesting. If someone would have
Oh,
come at me with VA at
listen,
18, I don't know. I
I
feel
will,
like that.
I will always read. If there's a horoscope in front of me, I'm going to read it because I'm curious to see what it says. But I love looking at stuff like that. But I think sometimes a lot of emphasis is placed on daily forecast from the astrologer's perspective, because I follow a lot of astrologers on social media. There's some really good ones who really have a handle on things, not even necessarily VA based, but they're grounded in their approach. And then you've got others who are making these major bogus predictions or claims based on sun sign information. That's the stuff that kind of gets me a little wonky. It's like, come on, really? I mean, at least, carve it out a little bit to get a little bit more specified. It's so someone once said these 6 signs are going to have great luck next month. I said, well, why don't you just add the other 4 or the other 6, and then we got everybody covered. It's like it's back to the rules thing that we were talking about a second ago. But it opens the door. And listen, if someone comes to astrology because they saw a forecast in a paper or they saw it online and then they raise their hand to want to know more, I'm all about that. You just want to understand the limitations of what they are, because I do know some people who will read their dailies in whatever publication they choose and then just fixate on that for the entire day. So no, you're kind of missing the point there. It's, you don't go around talking about the weather report all day long. Why would you do that with an astrological? Yeah.
Well, it's for me, I have to look at, there are things that trigger people, but I mean, it's it's a good response. And, in my sort of upbringing, in my way, I really hated all that stuff, but I came to a point where, sometimes it's useful. And so I accept it. But like you're saying, Michael, you sort of want to come to a point of understanding what it is and what it isn't. It's not actual astrology. It's astrology light at best, and it has 2 things. It can introduce people to the idea, and it can also demean it and make it less than it actually is. And so it does both. And so I compare it a lot to what I see in sort of religious fields and in Christianity and everything. You get the concept of what it is, like, okay, people say it's this and that and they do that, and yet then when you really get into the research and you study it and you realize, oh, it's actually nothing like we practice. You're like, this is like nothing. This isn't even close to what it is. Right, if you really want to go to the basis of what it is, we're not doing anything even close. But
no, you're correct.
And the reality is, as human beings, we tend to be lazy. That's the reality. And anything that's worth doing, you have to put a lot of effort into it if you want it to be good, and so that's the way anything is. And that's definitely the way astrology is. Like, I consider it a language. You're going to have to learn a different way of thinking and the way you form thought. It's really what it's doing. It affects the way, because language affects the way you form thought. If you don't have a word for it, it's hard to form the thought. You can't form the thought for what you're trying to express. The English language is so limited in how we use the word love, because we make it cover so many things. It's so generic, where in other languages, there's many words for it. For some of these, they distinguish the elements of it. We just lump it into one thing and we just, oh, that's love. Okay. What kind of love, but it's a limitation of the English language. And we see that in different versions in a sense of anything, but especially astrology, like when we go to the Pisces, oh my God, there's 30 degrees in Pisces. And yet you're going to limit it down to 1. Like, we're going to define all that by 1. And it's like, yeah, okay, kind of, but it's a lot more than that, or we're going to limit everything down to a sun sign. Okay, but we do have a moon, we do have Mercury, we do have Venus, like we have all these other things, like, plus you have every house cusp, you have one of the 12, so it's all operating inside of you.
And don't even get me started on aspects. I mean, forget about it.
Well, yes. Well, and I think that with VA, one of the things I got, because VA was really my major introduction into astrology. I knew a little bit, but not a lot. And VA grounds you in the planets for sure. Like, the planets are where it is. And that in traditional astrology and real, that is where you ground to, is you ground to the planet. And then aspects and houses, that's what you're dealing with. And then, of course, signs, which is really, when you're dealing with the houses, you're going to deal with that. But one of the things I found was that going through astrology and then backtracking was much easier. So I really learned VA first and then began to learn a lot of the other systems. And they became very easy because you already have a foundation. You have something that you're founded on that's solid. And then it's much easier to learn other systems from there. Like we're right now, I'm in a magic class and on Astrological Magic. Now it's very different than VA, but you get it. Like it's a different. So with VA, you're looking at your sort of human behavior and your psychology. That's not the way magic works. Magic doesn't work that way. That's not its purpose. So it's using different rules for a different end. It's going for something different, and it makes sense. But with the VA framework, I understand it. Like you can understand, because if you'll get to know the planets, and that becomes in the magical sort of in actual magic. And I'm dealing with actual magic, like the magi that you would see in the scripture. So it's that. But in actual magic, you have to know the planets. And that's one thing where VA is so strong on. You get to know the planets, you get to know the nature of the planet. And so it just gets easier to get involved in sort of other astrological practices and traditions with a VA foundation. That's what I found. So
yeah, that makes sense. I just didn't do it that way, but yeah, that does make sense. I always seem to do things more the harder way.
Darlene, you like to do it the harder way, but that's
like challenge myself a little.
Well, I think for anyone listening, the idea of the VA door is open regardless of whether you know anything about astrology or a lot about astrology, because it could work either direction. If it's of interest, it's not like you have to go learn all this astrology stuff first. In fact, I remember when this program started over a year and a half ago, where David had said, some of the best students are those who don't know anything about astrology, because they don't have to unthink of like planetary rulerships and a lot of things that we don't use in VA. And I can see that, because you're not having to fight up against that or the information that you already assimilated. If you're coming in fresh, you can hit the ground running. And it's a lot, but you could get up to speed a lot quicker than I think one would think. You got to put in the work. I mean, there's no shortcut. You got to put in the work.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also, the teacher plays a massive role in that.
Absolutely.
From that. So if you have someone who knows their stuff and can communicate it, then it's very effective. And so, like, again, anybody starting off, since that's really where I started. Again, I knew very little. I had not studied under anybody else. I had read some books, sort of. I knew enough to know there's something there. That's what I knew. There's something there, and was playing with it. But I mean, I had the book, the only astrology book you'll ever need. Have you? That's the book.
I think I got it on the shelf over there.
I had that book, and it came with a CD, and it gave you a program to do the chart.
Yes.
I
do
doing
have that
for 2 years, at least 2 or 3 years. I would just run people's charts, look at the book. That's what I'm doing. And I'm like, for me, what it was doing, it was proving, my God, this works. Like, that's what it was doing. It was proving it works. But I really didn't understand why it was work. Well, I still don't really know why, but even from an astrological point of view, why that would be that. And so, in getting to know the planets and the planetary combinations, and then of course the vibrational, which is your aspect style of how it's connecting, it became extremely powerful, like just so powerful in how exacting you can be and very specific. And it really takes over your mind. I will say that, because I tend to view everything through that lens. Like, oh, that's Mercury's there, or that's a Venus issue, or you can see this. Like you're sort of understanding things through that lens. And in dealing with people, it makes it way easier, because you can get right away, oh, this person's coming from a passion place.
Yep.
Okay. So this is a fire. So you've got to meet their fire. Now you can meet it with air, but I would tend to not want to meet it with a water sign with any sort of emotion, because that's not going to play right here. If you want to engage it, there's ways of engaging it, but you can, your mind just goes to thinking that way. You don't even have to think about it. It just does it.
It's funny you mentioned that, because when I first got into assessments in the late 90s, after I graduated and worked and realized, that I was not going to be a good employee for anyone, because that's just the way I'm wired. The assessments, it's a similar thing. You learn all this stuff. Okay. You learn what all these different things mean: introversion, extroversion, someone who's emotional versus stable, poised, relaxed, 300 different factors. But then once you learn all that and it starts to integrate a little bit, you just start seeing it instantly. The joke that my wife and I have is, whenever we sit down to eat at a restaurant, within the first 10 seconds after the servers left, I say, well, we're in good shape, so-so, or it's going to be a horrible experience, because I can't turn it off. Because I know, just from knowing people and I've assessed over 60,000 people throughout my career. That means running the assessments, interpreting the results for the client, sometimes with the actual person involved. But after you do that, and it's just interpreting assessments versus interpreting astrological charts, similar process, just a different tool. That's it. So when you steep yourself in this stuff, whether it's assessments, astrology, or whatever system you're working with, and you get to that point where it's unconscious competence, you start making those determinations really fast when someone's speaking with you over the phone or face to face, or you're working on a team, or whatever the case might be. And it really helps cement things from the standpoint of you understanding where they're coming from without even having to say a word, because you're modifying your approach and your style to meet them where they're at. And that's really, exactly that's powerful. That's powerful.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Would you say, like, using your assessment mind, would you say that you'd be able to, I don't know what tools you would use to assess someone, but I imagine you have some. Like we have astrology to assess in that sense, if you want to use that terminology. But would you say that you would know, by talking to someone and a little bit of interaction, you'd be able to feel like something in them astrologically and look up like their vibrations and see that going on?
I can say that now. I couldn't say that 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, but yeah, absolutely. And a game I like to play when I'm just watching TV or we're talking, I'll lean over and whoever's there, my wife is usually within earshot. Oh, that's a very Uranian type of activity. This person's acting like a spaz, or whatever it might be, because it's just there, so without a doubt. And the thing that really surprised me is that these two worlds now really feed each other as far as skill set. Assessment interpretation has given me a tremendous leg up on interpreting astrological charts. And it goes the other way too, because I find myself now, when I'm doing work for a corporate client, I'll sometimes use terminology. Well, we're right on the cusp of such and such, and the language is kind of bleeding in there, but it really holds true, because at the end of the day, we're trying to make sense of the most complicated thing in the world, and that's human beings, looking at preferences, potential, and how they operate. So the worlds definitely support each other. And for the longest time, it was like, oh, I can't let my corporate clients know I'm into. I don't advertise to them. I never bring up astrology unless they ask. And if they do, I'll say, yeah, the astrology that I work with is based on the same statistical and scientific principles as assessments are, as far as looking at validation, reliability, all this other stuff. It's the same approach. It may sound a little out there, but it's interesting to see how those two worlds intersect. And I'll just throw this in because it just popped into my head, and I'll forget it if I don't. One of the things that I've come to a conclusion on, and I'd say this is over the past 5 years, and that is, you meet someone, and the first thought in my head is, all right, do you mention the A word? Do you mention that you're an astrologer or not? Listen, not everybody's into this. I get that. And I'm not beating people over the head with it. But for those who are interested, I'll talk astrology to the wee hours of the morning. If you're not interested, that's fine. We'll drop it. I had to drop my preconceived notions of who would be versus would not be into astrology, because I've had my mind blown many, many times. I'm thinking, all right, well, I'm having lunch with this person. They haven't seen me in 17 years. They're very whatever as far as their beliefs, and there's no way they're going to go for astrology. And then they mentioned, hey, I saw that you are doing horoscope. Tell me about this astrology thing. And it's like the last person on earth I think would be interested in it ends up wanting to know everything, versus other people who I think, oh, they'll really want to hear about astrology, and there's no interest. So you never know. I don't know how that relates to anything, but I just.
No, it's very true. I mean, for me, I'm like, there's like not, for me, if you're not interested in astrology, you might as well just leave me, because I mean, I talk about it with everyone. So yeah, it's like, that's well known. And, the reality is the vast majority of people are interested because it's about their favorite subject, them. Yeah. And if you can talk about them, they love it. So
yeah, that's right.
And yeah, and if you can give them insight on them or their relationships or their kids or anything, man, they're all into it. So I find there's more people that are interested than not. And especially when you can approach it and deal with it, from a reasonable and a more scientific based, where we're basically dealing with research. You're not just spouting off, and you're not dictating to someone. That's for me a big thing that's a big no-no. You cannot tell somebody what to do. Like, that's not what this is about. It's like you said, weather forecasting. I'm going to tell you what season you're in. You determine what you're going to do from there, know? And I really believe people already have a very strong sense of what they should do. So I don't think most people come in totally blank. They sometimes want to say that they haven't a clue. They do. They just haven't, they don't realize that little clue that they're dismissing is actually, that is the clue, and they just have dismissed it. Oh, that's nothing. No, that might be something more than you think. And so when you say it, they'll be, I thought, but, and you, again, it was in you. And for an astrologer, if we can do stuff where we bring it out of people, then that's, what more can we do? That to me is amazing, when you can discover stuff inside of people and really help them find it. And so then they find the answer. That's the one thing. The astrologer doesn't find the answer for you. No. He helps you find it.
True.
That's it.
Yeah.
So,
that reminds me of I had a client several months ago, and I'm going to be vague here on purpose because I take confidentiality very, very seriously. It was an older individual, and we went through their vibrations and charts and the whole 9 yards and everything. And at the end of the call, the individual said to me, you know what this is confirmed for me? And they had never really gone to a professional astrologer before. I said, no, what is that? They said that I was not screwed up as a kid. I was just in a situation, and this was someone who was probably in their 60 or 70th decade of life. So we're not talking about someone on the young end. They said to me, this helps me now understand that I was just in the wrong place in the wrong environment, and that's why I didn't flourish. And I was not, quote, a screw up, is their words, not mine. When you have those type of experiences and they're able to make that connection, that's the power of this stuff.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
the beauty of this stuff. Because I mean, all I'm doing is looking at, here's the wiring, here are your circuits.
Yep.
Here's where you're at now based on what you're telling me and what have you. And it was like, you could see the sigh of relief from this person. Say, due to whatever circumstances they had gone through, it's like they'd given them permission to say, oh, I'm okay. I get it now. This is who I am. I just couldn't.
And that's
pursue
so
this
powerful.
Very
that
much.
is how the reality is. You have the ability to change the past.
Yeah.
And you don't physically change what happens, but you change a person's perspective on it. And once you change you literally change the past, because they have a different feeling. So with the moon, the whole issue with the moon is reflecting the past into the present. And what you've done is you've shifted that and made it be so different, which affects their emotional state, which affects everything that we go to in the future. You know, it's like, this is the dynamic of a moon sort of reflective thing. And if we as astrologers can help people practice reflection, if we can help that process go on, it's so powerful, you know, that you're really just helping a person be their own teacher, helping them see the truth, helping them understand that, you know, you can see a fourth house and it's so devastated. Like, you've got Saturn, you've got Mars, and you got all, you know, when I get a Saturn, Mars, and all this in the fourth house, in the, like, okay, stuff's going on, man. But then you realize, and you look and you see stuff in their 10th house, and you see like, without those trials, without that, you can't become the person you're meant to be. Like that, you cannot. You have to have that. And so, you know, people can look and think that, oh, I wish it wasn't. I wish it wasn't. Well, you know what? If you don't get that, you don't get this. You know, here you've made a success of yourself. You're very driven. You've got this, you've got that. And without this, that doesn't happen.
It's the price of admission.
Exactly. It's, you know, you're working out, and yeah, it's hard, but it's not for nothing. You know, that suffering, that pain, those things you went through, they weren't for nothing. You can see the results. You can see what it's trying to do within you and how it's making you stronger. Or you'll see a lot of counselors that they needed to experience pain, because if they're going to help people going through a lot of pain, if they don't understand, if they haven't been through it themselves in any way, shape, or form, good luck. You're not going to be able to empathize with anybody. You're not going to understand. But you'll see that a lot of times. You'll see that in the counselor's chart, you know. So, and to explain that to someone, to say that I see that, which is really the whole statement. I see you. I see you. I see what you're doing. You know, I see what's happened in your life. It's so powerful. And I have, you know, I just haven't experienced anything that equals that kind of dynamic where you can speak to someone in such a real, genuine, and effective way. And so fast. Like, literally, you've never met the person, and we can go right
That's
away.
what I was going to just mention. And that's another core benefit of VA. You get there so quick. You could get there so fast without a lot of rooting around the chart and asking 8 million questions. I mean, yeah, you obviously dialogue with a person, but when you start running the calculations and you see where the strongest vibrations and aspects are, that's where you go. And 9 times out of 10, that's where you need to go. And it's so efficient, which, you know, is another thing that I find appealing about VA. You're not dawdling around. You're getting to the core of the matter. Because, you know, I often tell people, say, how often do I need to see you? I said, no more than twice a year. That's just me personally. I don't want you dependent on me. Go live your life. You know, the weather's not going to change all that much. You know, you got to be your own empowerment. And if I can just kind of help point the way and maybe open the door, then it's up to you. Take it and run with it.
A different view. Like, had you thought of it like this? Had you considered this? Oh, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful to look at it from that perspective. And I think being able to perceive that for someone and help them kind of navigate through the different cycles, because the last 2 podcasts that Christopher and I did, we talked about the cycles of the planets. One was more like general, and then one was more focused on Saturn and the cycles. And we can understand where we're at in that space and being able to articulate that to someone when they don't even have the words to do that. It's almost like, oh, and then like getting them to see that this is a time period. You're going to shift into another time period. I think that awareness is like a directive to your experience. Does it tell everything that's going on when you're talking about transits? No, not really. I mean, it can get really specific. I mean, it can tell you more about behavior patterns, but you know, when you're looking at the whole overall, it's more like this is the phase of yourself that you're in. And sometimes you're on the top and sometimes you're struggling and you're dealing with it. But those struggles are what builds upon the next part of your journey, you know? So I think that's the good part of looking at VA. And I think VA does that so beautifully because it looks at, well, is the energy flowing correctly through your chart? If it, you know, whatever energy you're happening to look at, whatever vibration you're looking at, if it isn't, then you look at the direction and how you can make that flow correctly for you, because the energy's there. It's just, are you using it correctly? Is it helping you? Is it really getting you to where you want to go? I think of VA as being really strategic for that matter, you know, gives you an opportunity to have like a strategic plan. You know, sometimes there's a time to be a little bit more quiet and, you know, focus inwardly. And sometimes there's a time to be a little bit more extrovert. I was going to ask you guys, do either of you look at the strongest vibrations for yourself for like a day, or is that something you guys look at yourselves? Like looking at in series 4, I think it's Astro Vibe is what it's called. Being able to see what the strongest vibration is for you for that, you know, time period.
I will look at that with clients. For myself, I'll generally just pull up aspects in the natal, unless I'm looking for something specific. If I've got something going on and I have a strong 13th vibration and 78, I believe is when you multiply it out. So I may check those if I've got a big event or project or something happening to see what's going on there. Most of the time, yeah, because I look at my chart not daily, but I'm in and out of it multiple times a week just to see what's going on. You know, pull up transits. If I had an exceptionally good day, I want to know what's going on. If I had an exceptionally not so good day, I want to look to see what's going on. But more often than not, I tend to use the vibrational forecast piece there, which is, I think, what you're talking about inside of Sirius. I'll use that with clients, but not as much for myself. But maybe I need to look at that. See, that's the thing. There's no one way of doing something in astrology. There's so many ways to get. Yeah, I don't know where I heard this the first time. Chris, you probably have this reference better, or maybe know the origin of it. There's more than one way up the mountain, but in the end, there's only one mountain. And in VA, there's a bunch of different ways you can get to that information that you need. And you know, there's certain do's and don'ts, but overall, you want to just get up the mountain. And whether you're looking at one type of chart or vibration or, you know, ranges, all sorts of different ways to get to that information, I've found. But maybe I need to start looking at that. I like it.
So like for me, when you do with the vibrational astrology forecast listing, I don't like one day things. I just don't think they do much. Now, like if you're specifically looking at it a day for doing, then yeah, you want to look at the day. But in general, I look at the year. So I want to see the year, and I want to see. So it allows me to go up to 14 days is what it allows me to do. So I do at least 14 days. I want to know a vibration that is within 3 to 4 degrees. It's tight.
Yeah.
I actually even want tighter. And then I want to see 14 days. And so I'll get for the year, you might have 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe at the most. That's all you'll have. That's what I look at. So I get, for me, how I want to do it is I want to frame my year. So I want to look at from my natal chart. Then I want to do the solar return chart. And I want to look at my highest vibrations in the solar return. All right. I want to look at my strongest ones. And then I want to get a good 3 or 4 at the most. This kind of sets a theme is what I find. It sets okay, what's kind of going on. Then in the natal chart, what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the outer planets, looking at the houses. Okay, where are my outer planets? Where's Jupiter? Where's Saturn? Where's Uranus? Where's Neptune? Which house is it in? That's kind of, so this is just, I'm just big into themes. Like I need to know what this year's kind of, what its theme is. Once I get its theme, finding the details of it is not as, it's not as hard or not as big of a deal, you know? Like, but I need my theme. I need to like, what's going on? You know, like right now I have a one vibe in Jupiter and Uranus and Jupiter. Okay. That's what's big right now for 14 days. It's a Uranus or Jupiter, Uranus, Jupiter, all in the one vibe.
Sounds like a party to me.
Well, if you think about it, so Jupiter is very philosophical in nature. You know, you have that sort of expansive kind of thing. Uranus is, there's a certain creativity to a Uranus. It's in the moment Uranus. And as you all know, I'm working on this freaking book constantly. And it is like, oh, I am just ready for this to be done. But a lot of it is when I get in the zone, I can pop them out like nobody's business. Like, but I need to get in the zone. And this, like, okay, I'm just going. I'm going. And so it works well, you know. So looking at this too, I look at the nature of my Jupiter is Taurus in the 12th house in the natal. So in the Vibe 1, it's in the natal chart. And for me, it deals with the concept of making the spiritual a practical thing. It has that Taurus in the house of sort of openness and unbordered. So it wants to make everything spiritual or anything of the unknown. You have to make it practical. And as Starling knows, that's a massive thing for me. Like, if astrology isn't practical, if it's not practical, then I don't want to use it. Like, I'm not going to suggest it to anybody. And I would never want to, like, can you do it every day? Now, I will, and I'm kind of like Michael in the sense of, hey, if I had a really good day or felt really good, I'm curious as to what's going on. Or if my wife had a really good day, or if she's in not a great mood, which is even more when I'll check it out.
Does she listen to this podcast?
Well, she knows I do it.
So. Okay, well, then you're all right.
Oh, yeah, she knows, like, what's going on? And I look and okay, that's what's happening. It just gives you a framework to understand what you're working with. That's all you're doing. It doesn't tell you what to do. It's just like, okay, this is happening. So you can see like those Saturn transit or Uranus transits, that Saturn transit, it's restricting. It's giving a sense of it's wanting to narrow that puppy down. Okay. So yeah, that can be a little harsh on someone. It can, especially if it's on their moon or on, or the sun. That's going to be a thing, So I use it, but I usually like as we're going into the year, I just need to get a sense of what's going on for me this year. What's happening? Like when Starlene and I were doing some of these larger transits, we saw that I was going through my Jupiter return this year. It's literally happening in a couple days. And that's a thing, and here I am writing this freaking 800-page book. 800 pages.
Wow.
Does it come with its own forklift?
Oh my God. So it's not small. And, doing this, and it's like, okay, it's, and I'm in my second Saturn return. So I'm in my second Saturn return. I've got Jupiter, and Starlene already knows because we kind of talked about it, where the Uranus opposition was more of a difficulty than the Saturn return my first time. And we're seeing it again. Like the Saturn return, it's been more of an establishment type thing that's happened. Like you take a step. That's what I've seen in Saturn returns for me. Now, again, for other people, because it's also the moon cycle. I'm coming up to my full moon, where Starlene's actually at the opposite, where during her Saturn, she was going down to the balsamic. She was like, so it's interesting when you begin to, again, map things out. And like Michael said, you can't just take one. It only means one thing because it's in the context of the rest of the chart. And so you always have to do everything in the context of the rest of the chart. It doesn't, like, you can't just say, oh, Saturn return. Oh boy, it's going to be bad. Well, not when you're coming up to a full moon. It's not as bad. It's just, it's making you hone in on what you need to do. As opposed to it being at a balsamic when you're having to let go of everything. So it's very different. And yet it's still, the energy is the same. It's wanting to cut and make decisions. It's just one is making decisions towards a forward movement, and the other is kind of letting go, is from the different moon cycles. So, but yeah, I do like I'm finding that the VA forecast listing with 14 and narrowing down the level of the conjunction, making it 2-3 degrees. I like it exact. That pinpoints my year more, gives me something to go on. So
yeah, it's not just your Jupiter return though. Jupiter and Uranus conjunct on your Jupiter return, so you get an extra like here. But I mean, like that doesn't happen very often. people
No.
like in life. You know, your Jupiter return comes with Uranus. Like
No.
what?
I know, and
So,
you take
you
all
know,
those Uranian kind of thoughts, which is science. It rules that kind of realm. It rules. It also rules the realm. You know, if we look at it as a rulership of Aquarius, which to me that's massive right now, because you have how does an individual fit within a group, and how does the group really help the individual? Unlike the Piscean way, which is just we're all one. There isn't really the emphasis on the individual. It's the collective is the Piscean way. Now we see how does the collective serve the individual from the Aquarian dynamic. So, you know, if you look at that, and here I am working on one that's helping to understand people from a 360-degree perspective instead of just from an astrological point of view, from a 12 sort of perspective, you know, looking at it as 12 different types, it just expands it so much. So I think it's definitely Uranian there. And Jupiterian, it's philosophical. It's you're having a larger scale, larger view of things. So it works. It works.
it's so interesting how it just kind of plays out in our life. Yeah, I just wondered if you guys looked at that. I look at it pretty much like the same as you guys. If there's something specific going on, I might look at it to see what that was, or if I'm going to intentionally do something, then I would look, you know, at the timing of things. But I think it's interesting to look at. I like looking also at the timeline forecast. That's really helpful too.
I'm in and out of that more frequently than anything else. Because it's quick. You know, you can see exactly what's going on there and the intensity of it, and it's just, you know, boom, you're able to see whether it's. I was doing some stuff. Was it last night? 2 nights ago for the weekly things that I send out, and I was drilling it down by the day. And what's great about that feature, and for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, this is just a segment inside of the Series 4 software. It shows the intensity of these transits when they start, when they peak, and then when they wane, so that you can get an idea of what that intensity level is going to be like throughout the whole bit of that cycle. And to me, that is very powerful, especially if I'm consulting with a client and we're looking at opportune times or maybe times to maybe lay a little low to show that intensity starting out very light, then it increases, gets really intense, and then fades again. And it's and then there's ways to customize that where you can drill into vibrations and whatnot. And I think this is a good point for the listeners to understand. You got 3 different astrologers here, all sharing the same core knowledge base, but the individual ways that we practice are very nuanced, because once you have the foundation of understanding the concepts and what the rules are, then you can look at these different techniques and explore things in a different way that may ultimately get you to the same place, but you've got some latitude as far as the road that you take to get there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, everyone's an individual.
Totally.
Yeah,
totally.
I mean, then that's the same with any type of science, if you will. Like any therapist you go to is going to have a different technique that they use, and so on and so forth. You know, it's good too, because, you know, being the inquisitive minds that I know all of us are, and wanting to like dig deeper, that what you're thinking of, you can always test out and research and figure out if it really works or if it doesn't, or maybe there's a better way. So that's also a cool part too. Understanding the core principles of VA.
Yeah. Where we are right now in astrology, I mean, the reality is, do I think we could map things out way better, you know, with more research, more study, more of this? Yes. But you know what? We're all living lives. And so you could spend your whole day, and I was like, oh, I've got this day figured out. And now it's the end of the day. It's like, I didn't do anything.
But I mapped it.
You figured out. I see. I'm not going to do anything. It's like, okay, you have to live a life. And I think that's part of the beauty too of VA, is that you can get answers faster. You know, that is part of the beauty of it. It will get it more specific, but quite quickly. You can look it up fast, you know. And I mean, ultimately that's where astrology has to go. It's all about speed, because you don't want to spend your entire day figuring out what to do for the day. Like that's not going to work. That won't work. So
No, but you can figure out what you're going to do with your projection of life, walk down
You
this
can
path
do
and
weather
see
like you
good
said,
stuff.
weather forecasting. You can sort of like,
Yeah,
if
like,
you look at the beginning of the year, you can kind of get it like, okay. And maybe you want to double check that, but yeah, you can't become obsessive. Like, to me, that would be unhealthy if I'm really seriously wanting to spend a lot of time each day trying to figure out, like, that's not healthy.
No.
That's like, I'm going to go to the doctor every day and get a checkup to make sure everything's running right. Yeah, no, we're not doing that.
As long as one of those is a psychiatrist, then you'll be in good shape, because you need,
yeah, they be cleaning house, man. Oh yeah, we probably should be promoting that more. You need to go to an astrologer every day. No, I'd reject it. I would not take any client like that. Like, no,
please,
that,
no.
Yeah,
no,
I want to help.
It's
I don't want to hurt.
You. Exactly. It's good to help. It's good to understand so that you can maneuver through it. And of course, to understand astrology, you don't to understand how it works in your life. You don't necessarily need to know astrology, but you could go to an astrologer that you trust and understand yourself from that perspective. I think it's been really helpful too.
It resonates. If it doesn't resonate, to me, I always tell them, if this is something that doesn't resonate, don't just drop it, man.
Bingo.
No one is telling you what to do. So don't ever think that. And you got to, as astrologers, we have to be careful not to plant negative seeds. We can't plant the ideas in people's heads that are really not good. You got to kind of be careful with that, because you can. Like, all you have to do is, like, especially when you're dealing with relationships, and looking at things, and you can see like potential issues, obviously, in relationships, and you have to be very careful how you handle that. You can't just say, well, you might have a tendency, because that's going to be a hammer that somebody uses against somebody. I mean, you're dealing with the psyche, you're dealing with, the things inside a person, and you just don't want to provide any weapons. And we all know how, man, people will grab anything they can use as a weapon later on. It's amazing what they can weaponize. So you're not going to be perfect at it, but you just want to be conscious of it, not to be sloppy. So.
Yeah. And that's a good point. Always wanting to not do any harm to anybody, not wanting to like be able to help them, like you said, not give them the answer, but also allow them to see the path that they need to make. And I think that's really important in terms of anybody, for that matter. Even if you go to a psychiatrist or psychologist, they're not going to want to say, hey, XYZ, you have to. If they do, you should run, actually.
And sadly, too many do.
No, I know.
Way too many do.
I saw a video about that, like different psychologists of like the modern age they were talking about. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's kind of sad, because that happens. It becomes mental manipulation.
It does.
Yeah.
You're taking over. You are, in a sense, casting spells. You're selling words, and you're capturing people. You're capturing their minds, and it's very dangerous. You want to empower people, which means they are making the decisions. If you're making the decisions for people, you have disempowered them, and
that's true.
Astrology is not about disempowerment. Astrology is about empowering the individual to be who they are. That's all we're trying to do, is help clear away things, help create situations where you can understand from a different perspective. I can see, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's what I want. Like, that's a good way. I hadn't thought of that. Or the other one is, well, you say that, and that's been in me. I just didn't think it was so set. Like, I didn't realize that was actually true. Again, you empower the person. Stuff that all of it should be in them. That's usually what I will tell a client, is that I shouldn't be telling you anything you don't know. You may just not have thought of it like that. That's it. But you should know everything I say. It should already resonate.
That's a great way to say that. I'm not telling you anything that you shouldn't know, but you might not have heard it explained this way before. That's good. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Because if it resonates with them, then, you're on the right track,
Exactly. Yeah. You should, like, we carry a lot of thoughts inside of us, and typically we have the right thoughts inside of us. We just don't know they're always the right thoughts. It's like, and then you get someone else confirmed, no, that is the right thought. I think that is the right thought. But it's always about finding the truth inside the person. They carry their truth inside. They carry the answers for their life inside. That's what the chart shows us. All of it's there. You lack nothing. And so we want to just engage it and help bring it out and encourage it. That's it. Nothing more. So
that makes sense.
It's cosmic DNA.
It is.
It definitely is. So, Michael, is there anything that you want to share with our audience before we let you go here? So, anything that you're doing, upcoming, things that you're doing?
Well, I just finished teaching a very basic astrology class for people who have an interest in astrology, but had no prior knowledge. So it was really geared toward newbies. And I got to tell you, it was rewarding for me to do that, because the only thing most folks knew is that they knew their sun sign, which is this, whether you're Aries, Taurus, Capricorn, the sign that the sun was in when you were born. And it was very, very cool to see people go through that initial shock and awe of, oh my gosh, I got to remember all this stuff and the glyphs I'm talking ground zero basic is where we started. And it was, a real intro first step class. And I had more fun doing that than I thought I was going to do. So I think what I would share with people, and I don't have another one of those scheduled now, but I may at some point in the future. You can sign up for the alert on the website if you want to know when that happens. But I think it's a twofold thing. And that is, if you've always been interested in astrology, but have never really taken that step, you can do it. There's a lot of information, but presented in the right way and studied appropriately through a system or process or a teacher or what have you, you can learn this stuff. And it's very, very accessible. And I encourage people to, if they're curious, take that step. There's tons of videos on YouTube. Back in my day, it sounds like I'm, Grandpa Abe Simpson from The Simpsons. We didn't have the internet. You had to go buy books. And as we discussed earlier, sometimes the books would conflict with each other, and you get missed pieces of information here. Craziness. And that probably still happens today a lot. But now, if you find, obviously we're all students of David. David alone has got close to 1,000 videos out there for free on the internet. You can start learning this stuff. So I would encourage people, if you're curious, kind of peek behind the curtain and see what's going on out there. For those of you who are listening and have never been to an astrologer before, there's someone out there for you. And I think this goes back to what you were saying before, Chris, as far as you've got to resonate with the person who you are seeking counsel from. And people often say, well, no business has any competition. It's all about differentiating. I believe that more so to be true in astrology than any other business, I guess, or art or discipline or whatever you want to call it, because no two astrologers are the same. There'll be some people who I watch online. It's like, ooh, I wouldn't get a reading from them if you gave it to me. And then there are other people who it's like, oh, I'd love to speak to them. Trust your gut and trust your intuition. If you're thinking about getting some sort of guidance from someone, ask yourself how you feel. The beautiful, when you watch their stuff and you watch them present information, the beauty of social media, there's a lot of negatives about it, but the beauty, I think, or one of them is when you're talking about astrology, you get to audition astrologers by just watching the way they present.
Yeah.
What's their tone like? What's their approach?
Yeah.
Is it dogmatic? Is it lighthearted? Is it serious enough for you? Is it too flamboyant for you? Whatever it is, there is an astrologer out there who will match what you need. You may need to find them a little bit, but that's one of the benefits of social media, where you can just kind of look at people's channels and see what they have out there. And I say that especially true if anyone's ever had a negative experience with an astrologer. I always ask on my intakes, have you ever had an astrological consultation? And if so, what was that experience like? And what I find is people show up at 50-50. It was great. I loved it. And the other hand, oh, it was horrible. They missed the mark, or they were insisting on something that just wasn't true. So even if you've knocked on the astrology door before and may have had a less than stellar experience, give it another shot. Just make sure that you're vibing, and I mean that literally and figuratively, with the person who you're connecting with, because you're not going to get too far in any type of relationship, consulting or counseling type of scenario if you're not clicking with that person. And there's someone out there for you. So keep looking till you find them.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a real, and I always feel bad for people that have a bad experience when they just didn't get either a skilled astrologer or they simply got a dogmatic astrologer. And it's like, that can wreck it for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
And I understand that. I had one client and she was like, you're it. You're the last one. Like, I've been to so many astrologers and
no pressure.
They all suck. Yeah, I didn't take it as pressure. So, well, I found it out towards the end is when I found it out, because she's like, you're the first one who didn't start. She had in her natal chart, she had like Saturn in this, like she had some element that every astrologer had mentioned straight off, which was a negative. And I never mentioned it once. She mentioned halfway through the reading, we're like, we're halfway, you haven't even mentioned this one. I'm like, yeah, why would I mention that? It's like not a big deal to me. So, and you just never know. Like I know for myself, I get one sign a lot. There's a certain sign that's heavy in the person's chart. I get it all the time, and it's Scorpio. I get like Scorpios out the yin yang. But and you'll resonate with a sign.
Yeah.
You'll oftentimes see that you'll get a lot of this type of individual, or they have it. The energy is dominant in the chart. Might not be their sun sign, might not be, but it's a dominant energy in the chart, and you get it. So, and you're right. You got to find. There isn't a right or wrong. It's what's right for you and what's what's going to work for you. There isn't a wrong or right way. There's a lot of good astrologers who do things very differently. They use totally different methods, and they're very good. They're
absolutely.
Vedic astrologers. I mean, my God, they speak a totally different language, but it still can be very effective. So,
absolutely.
you're going to be a different sun sign, a different moon, a different.
Admittedly, what I know about Vedic can fit in my thumbnail, and that's fine. And I remember when I found David's stuff online many, many years ago, and in one of his videos, he had said, if you're going to be an astrologer, professional or otherwise, where you're going to really do this stuff, you learn one, maybe two systems at most. You can't know them all. If someone wants Vedic, I'm not your guy. I don't know, Ratu, Ketu. That's all I know. I think, then those are the nodes. I think, not even 100% sure.
Rahu,
but
Ketu,
you can't. And let me just tag on to that. If you run into an astrologer who claims to know everything about every system under the sun, or better yet, they created their own system, because there are people out there who claim it with no data to back it up. Run. Your best astrologers know one or two systems at max, and they go deep because they understand it. If they claim to know it all, then they probably know very little. All right, I'm off my soapbox now.
There's too many rules. You could not know. Like, that's so impossible.
Exactly. It gets to the point of absurdity. If it's like, well, yeah, I know Vedic and sidereal and humanistic, and please, pick a lane.
Yeah,
and drive.
You're right. You have to learn a language. Once you learn a language, it's easier to adapt to others.
Sure.
But you have to master one, and that takes a long time.
It does. Years. No one wants to hear that. It takes years.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But here's the thing. The people who are really into astrology and are in it for the good, they accept that. It's like, well, this is just part of the deal. You can't shortcut it. There are no shortcuts. And here's your shortcuts. Do thousands of charts. There's your shortcut.
Yeah.
Anyone within a 500-mile radius of you, and you're first learning, run their chart and talk to them and get feedback. That's how you get good. And it takes a while. And be prepared to be way, way off. That's okay. It's part of the learning.
That's true. And I think that's the part to make it, instead of just reading a book smart, if you will, actually functioning in it is definitely the difference. And I think you can't speed that up.
Nope.
Yeah.
It's just, and every client hones you for the next one. And, it's because I always tell clients, I said, look, I'm going to interpret your chart based on vibrational astrology principles. I said, if I run into something and it's not applicable or what I'm saying doesn't, I said, please tell me, because we're constantly refining our models. I want the feedback if something doesn't land. Sometimes it doesn't land. A lot of times it could be that it might not have been explained by me in the way that resonates with them. And then when you take the second pass, it's like, oh, now I get it.
Yes.
But still,
I find that a lot.
Yeah. And so I want to know, I don't want a client to sit there and just nod their head and go like this if they're internally saying, no, stop me in my tracks, please. Because you got a lot of astrologers who don't want to be confronted or have any feedback on that.
You learn how to adjust it, how to say it properly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to describe a dynamic, and a dynamic is just that. It's a dynamic. It's moving. Like
a moving target.
Yeah. It's like, okay, there's different ways, and people like things black and white. They do. They like it black and white, and life isn't black and white. So it's like, you can say something. There'll be things I'll say at the beginning. Oh, this looks like oh, I'm not that. Then like halfway through, they're like, oh yeah, I'm totally this. I said that. You said that.
Oh, yeah, that happens too. When they don't necessarily see it in themselves. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, it's identical to what I just said. Oh, I hadn't thought of it like that.
Yeah, well, that's all right. I remember back when I was in graduate school, getting my clinical psych degree, and I remember one of my professors saying, as a therapist, the best we can hope to do is open the door and point the way. And I think that's so dead on for astrology as well. We can't make anyone do something. We're not going to save someone from themselves. We're not going to help avert crisis. We can open the door, point the way using the best tools that we have, and then it's up to them to go either make decisions and do things or not do things. And
I think the thing that astrology kind of gains over a lot of the therapy, in a sense, you're right. The goal is the same between the astrologer and the therapist. Mm-hmm. It's just the astrologer can start right off, like 1 minute into it. We're already
you don't need 6 weeks of rapport building.
I don't need any questions. Give me your birthday, time, place, and we can go. We don't have to sit here for this first few sessions. Me figuring out how your Mars, because that's what they're doing. I got to figure out how your Mars is, how your work goes, how your Mercury goes. They're not using that language, but they are using this symbolic language of it totally.
Sure.
And then they got to figure out what those are, hope they guess right, and then tell them counsel from there.
Yeah.
And
that takes time.
The astrologer cuts all that out. We don't need any of that.
That's funny. Well, this was great having you on the show with us, Michael. Thank you so much for coming.
I've enjoyed being here. You guys
definitely.
Always fun to chat with. I knew the time would just fly by, as you know, it always does. You get 3 astrologers together, forget about it. If we're in a hotel at a conference someplace, it's 3-4 in the morning and talking astrological theory in the lobby, and you're pulling up charts. It's a lifestyle. It really is.
Yeah,
it's a lifestyle.
It really is. Yeah.
And we'll be doing that in March. So
excellent. Yes. Looking forward to that.
Already got the stuff all ready to go. So,
ooh, cool.
Yeah, I got everything all arranged. So we're just March next year, Orlando, Florida.
Orlando. Oh, okay. So is that public now at this point, or kind of semi-public, or
It's
semi-public?
Like, all right. There's going to be a conference.
All right. Well, there we go.
It's breaking news.
Breaking news. Yes.
Breaking news.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too much.
Yeah. So we'll talk more about that on future episodes, though.
Of course. Yeah. Well, listen. Exactly. Yeah. So mark your calendars. Sometime March.
Mark your calendars.
25.
March 2025.
Excellent.
Yeah. It'll be exciting.
Awesome. It will. It's going to be really good.
Yes, it is totally going to be really good, Christopher. I cannot wait. I'm really looking forward to it.
Plus, it's not too hot then in Florida, as opposed to July in Orlando.
The best
been there, done that.
Yeah, it'll be perfect.
That's terrible. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, it was great talking with you. Thanks again for coming on the show with us. Is there anything else that you want to share with us before we wrap up here?
I just want to thank you both for having me. Enjoyed chatting astrology. And if people want to know more about what I do, check me out at blueridgeastrology.com. I do daily forecasts, even though I complained about them. But I do them on all the socials, and I do a weekly theme of the week is from an email perspective. And, that's all out there free for the taking at Blue Ridge Astrology.
People can subscribe to that and get their daily, see
absolutely.
what the vibrations are about. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yep. Yeah. And the daily forecasts on social media, they're all vibrational based. And I just send out one email a week. It's on Sunday, where I do a combination of any key vibrations that are active for the week, because like you mentioned before, a 1 day blip isn't all that impacting. And if like in this week, there wasn't that much going on. So I just reported on some aspects that are occurring throughout the week, and, try to keep it pure from a VA perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for all that work you do too.
Hey, my pleasure. It's not work when you're liking what you're doing. So
yeah, that's
the truth. Really, it really is.
A little work.
Remember that, Chris, as you're
800 pages.
800 pages. Exactly. 800 pages of fun.
All right, you guys, we're signing off. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.